Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome back to the show Nat Segaloff, who has written and or produced biographies of William Friedkin, Harlan Ellison, Stirling Siliphant, who wrote the screenplay for the Towering Inferno, which we're discussing today, John Belushi, Stan Lee, Larry King, Wallen Green, Paul Mazursky, and Sherry Lewis and Lamb Chop. He lives in Los Angeles, where he has given up expecting people to return his phone calls. I love that. And the book, of course, we are discussing today is one of his recent ones, More Fire, The Building of the Towering Inferno, a 50th Anniversary Explosion. Nat, welcome back. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Robert. It's good to see you again.
What was the inspiration behind writing about this disaster classic, 70s disaster classic?
Well, the primary one commercially is that publishers have this Jones for anniversaries, and that's why they like to publish books on the 25th anniversary of a film, the 40th anniversary, the 50th anniversary, and the Towering Inferno fit right in with the idea of a 50th anniversary of something, and it might as well be a film that I knew intimately.
Right, right. And you worked on the film too, right? Because I love the photo of yourself in there back in your publicist days. So I imagine you saw it then.
I
Right
saw
when
it
it came out.
before it was then. I was one of the people who worked on a special publicity crew that was hired by Fox and Irwin Allen to go around the country and publicize the film. My territory was New England because I was a local publicist in Boston, and a fellow named David Forbes, who we may discuss later as the marketing genius, swept in and hired me away from my then job and made me in charge of New England for the Towering Inferno, dedicated to that film for 3 or 4 months. And so I had a wonderful time working for a great company with a good product. It very rarely happens that way.
What did you think of it when you first saw it?
I was amazed. I mean, I'd seen a lot of Irwin Allen's other stuff and grown up on his television shows, of course. But the thing about the Towering Inferno that got me was it's real. I mean,
Mm,
the fire was real. They didn't have CGI then. You couldn't miniaturize either fire or water. And the Towering Inferno had both. And so the people who made the film were actually in jeopardy. Now, of course, they use models and things like that, but it was real. And that's what truly, truly affected me. Plus, of course, living in the Northeast, where we have something called bedrock, um, we have tall buildings. And to learn from various people that you really shouldn't go above the third floor of a building because
right.
that's as far as a ladder truck will reach, that's give me a pretty galvanizing piece of information.
Well, that I found that part really compelling, and I never really gave that much thought about, the higher up you go, the more there's a chance that you might not be able to get out. And I'd seen the film before, and when I watched it again a couple of weeks ago, and it's and I know you wrote about this. It's hard not to watch this and not think of 9/11. I mean, particularly when the one woman who is having an affair with Robert Wagner's, I forget the actress who played that part.
Yeah, Susan Flannery.
Yes, when she's basically forced out the window. I don't know if she necessarily chooses to jump or if it
The
was a fire.
explosion of
Yeah,
gases in her room just blows her right through the window.
right, right. And of course, those images came to my mind of people jumping out of the windows on 9/11, or they were forced out. And I remember watching documentaries on 9/11 and people saying, when the option is to jump that high, how horrible it must have been inside. And with this film, just it gives me goosebumps.
Mhm.
I mean, is it a different experience for you after 9/11 to see this now?
Well, it kind of runs over you at a certain point. 9/11 is the turning point in this country in so many ways that anything that came before is almost a fantasy. But no, I don't get traumatized by movies.
Right. Yeah. Maybe I do. I don't a little, but the film, what you also discussed was the marketing, which I found really like. I mean, this was not a film where they talk about sort of the when the blockbuster era began and Jaws, but it sounds like that kind of marketing. Am I right in that thinking? Was this sort of the start of that sort of mass marketing push and making as much money in the first weekend as possible and things like that?
I like to mark the beginning of the modern marketing period in 1975 with Earthquake, which came out from
Oh,
Universal,
right.
or maybe I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Make that 73. You get old and you forget stuff, but it was Earthquake that shook people up. And that's because it was opened in suburban theaters largely across the country before it opened in-town theaters. But let me go back a couple of decades. The process of opening films throughout all of Hollywood's history, beginning with the consolidation of the studio system in the 1920s, was to open a movie in one theater in a big city, and then a few weeks later open it in few theaters in the suburbs, which became suburbs after World War II, and then to open it everywhere in the drive-ins and neighborhood theaters on everything and everybody. And this is what Hollywood did. They would expand. But with the so-called blockbusters, especially Jaws, where they opened it in hundreds of theaters at the same time, they realized they could make a lot of money by opening a film. Why waste all your advertising budget on one theater? And there was a fellow named David Forbes who'd been hired by 20th Century Fox. He'd worked for MGM. He remains a close friend of mine, who said, well, we're doing it the wrong way. And he had to convince people at Fox about this in 1973 and 1974. 74 is when The Towering Inferno was released. He says, when you open a film in a theater, you buy television advertising to advertise the film. That's very normal. But the television advertising signal goes farther than just the one theater. Why not go first and choose how big a market you have for the television signal, and then fill in all of that marketing area with theaters? In other words, instead of matching the ads to the theaters, you match the theaters to the ads. It doesn't cost anything more, and all the more theaters can contribute to the advertising budget of the film and make it even bigger. They tried this out surreptitiously on a Fox film called Dirty Mary Crazy Larry with Peter Fonda and Susan George, and it seemed to work. And they perfected it with The Towering Inferno, and it's been the industry's rule ever since. Don't waste money. Advertise the film and then make the film available to people who see the ads.
Right.
The Towering Inferno broke the rules that way, and it established the blockbuster mentality, which we're now still seeing in Hollywood.
Right. So it's really not Jaws and Star Wars which is often what people say is what kicked all that off. It's really
Jaws and Star Wars were the first films that really benefited from this wide release.
Right.
But even Star Wars started off in only a few theaters originally. They didn't know it was going to be a hit.
Right.
Jaws certainly opened in many theaters and made its money back practically before the film was over. But I would hold that it's The Towering Inferno, which established the pattern, but it took a long time for these calcified brains in the motion picture distribution ends to realize that's what they had. Now, of course, that's the rule.
I had always heard that McQueen and Newman had this rivalry, and on this film, I read this before that McQueen, and you wrote about it, he insisted on having as many lines as Newman, if not, or he wanted more, right? He had to have more lines than Newman.
It was a careful diplomatic titration that Stirling Siliphant, the writer, produced to give Paul Newman and Steve McQueen the same number of lines. This was especially difficult because McQueen didn't enter the film until several minutes, in fact, about a half an hour into the picture. So he had to make up for it. But the other problem was blue eyes. And that is that both McQueen and Newman had photogenically blue eyes.
Right.
And each one of them would take Stirling aside at various times and said, don't let Paul or don't let Steve blue eye me. And what that means is after one of the characters had delivered a particularly pithy line, the other one would give or give a kind of a wisecrack ending it, and that would dictate the cut to the next scene. So that person, whether it's McQueen or Newman, would have the advantage in terms of motivating the progress of the action.
I see.
So Stirling said, well, we used to call these group Jeopardy films because so many people were in trouble. And Stirling said, no, the real person in Jeopardy is the writer who has to deal with all of these other actors.
Because it certainly seems to me that Newman is in it more. I mean, it feels like he's in it much more than McQueen. But
he's in it from the first couple of shots, yeah.
Yeah, because I suppose, I don't know, McQueen always preferred, as you wrote in the book, to speak less in movies because he liked to react. He's one of the great reactors. So I couldn't help but wonder, did he kind of let that go with the lines? Or is it about the same? It's a little hard to tell, but it seems like Newman has more lines than him.
I have something called a life, so I'm not going to sit down and list everybody's dialogue. But I will tell you that in the early drafts of the script, Steve McQueen's character, Mike O'Halloran, the fire chief, has a large backstory.
Oh, right, yeah.
He lives with a son on a houseboat. He has a wife, and he is responsible really for the safety of everybody. And they simply cut that because McQueen knows when McQueen comes on the screen, that's all you care about. You don't care if he's a family man. You don't care what he's done. He's going to solve the problem. And in fact, and this is something Scott Newman, Paul Newman's late son, told me, we were doing publicity, that originally the part of the fire chief or the part of the architect was offered to Steve McQueen, and he turned it down. He wanted to play the fire chief, and they figured, oh, Steve wants to ride around in fire trucks. But no, the reason that Steve McQueen wanted to play the fire chief and not the architect was that the fire chief is the only character in the film who has no guilt. He's not responsible for the
Right.
building. He's not responsible for the shortfall, not responsible for the corruption or politics or anybody.
He's a pure
He's
hero.
the only guiltless character.
Yeah.
And that's Steve McQueen, a brilliant, brilliant assessor of his own talent.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I really like him and everybody in it. And I didn't realize that Paul Newman's son was in it. And of course he died tragically not long after this film came out. Did you know him well? He died in 78, I believe.
No, we'd
Okay.
done publicity in Philadelphia, which is hardly getting to know anybody well. But no, he had an accidental overdose of
Right.
Valium and liquor. In fact, he dies in the film too, but they cut those scenes out because I was at the preview where they made this decision. Those who will remember the Towering Inferno know there's a young firefighter who's not tried. That's Scott Newman. And he has to rappel down an elevator shaft, and he's afraid to do it. McQueen says, well, in that case, you'll go first because we don't want you falling on top of other people who've gone. And he rappels down there, and then he makes it successfully. And we have a nice bonding moment between McQueen and Scott. Well, later in the film, his character accidentally grabs an electric cable and is electrocuted. There's a very sad moment about that. And what happened was when Irwin Allen saw the rushes of how well young Newman handled himself in the rappelling scene, he said, you're making a really great impression. We're going to kill you. And that's when they scripted and wrote this scene where he electrocutes himself. But after the preview that we saw, and it played very well, Irwin Allen decided to cut that out, largely in deference to the firefighters, because he wanted to keep the affection of the firefighting community and didn't want to show a firefighter doing something so stupid that he died because of it.
Oh, I see.
It was really a sop to the public relations. And it would have slowed the film down and sent it in a different direction, but it would have been a good death scene for Scott. Unfortunately, he did play one in real life.
Did you ever meet Paul Newman or McQueen?
Never met McQueen. Met Paul Newman once on a different picture.
Oh, okay.
I'll be very brief about this, but there was a screening of the effect of gamma rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds, in which Newman directed his wife Joanne Woodward beautifully. And I was at a screening of the film in Boston because it was opening in January '73. And all of a sudden, I'm standing in the back because I don't want to take a seat. It's a crowded theater. His voice comes up behind me and says, how's the picture playing? I said, pretty good. And I turn around and it's Paul Newman, who was shorter than me. And his eyes were red, white, and blue because he'd been drinking Coors all day. And so he was buzzed and was a great guy. I'd met him a couple of times since then doing publicity, but this was the first time I'd ever been almost faced with Paul Newman.
Wow.
And yes, he was as handsome and as magnetic as everybody has said ever.
And I like the interview with Susan Blakely that you did. And of course, she's in the film. What was your experience like talking with her?
Well, she's a sweetheart. And this was one of her first films. Right. And of course, she gets to play with Fred Astaire and Paul Newman and Steve McQueen and all the important people she'd ever grown up with. She was a model at the time and got this job almost at the last minute. Again, she's a real sweetheart, and she's one of the very few people still around from the film.
Right.
And I'm very happy that she was able to talk to me.
I guess you didn't want to talk to Faye Dunaway? That's not on the cards?
I was always advised when I was working on the Arthur Penn book not to make any sudden movements around Faye.
Oh, that's right. Because in that book,
we swapped phone calls on our message machines, but never did connect. Listen, my admiration for her is enormous as an actress.
Me too.
As a person.
Right. Yeah. No, she's phenomenal. It's a shame they didn't do much more with her part in the film. I know you mentioned that.
They had a little more with her because she had a hers was a very important backstory. Faye Dunaway plays the girlfriend of Paul Newman, but she's also a reporter for the newspapers. Who, by the way, has never seen reporting in the whole film, but she's been given a job in another city as a managing editor, and this affects the relationship. And it really is an early stab at feminism for Hollywood anyway, because she would have to leave Paul Newman. I mean, who would leave Paul Newman? But she may have to for business purposes. But that part was trimmed. You couldn't put too much of one character in the script. You had to move it on. You had all these people.
Right.
And the problem constructing it and then editing it and then directing it is you had to keep the story moving and you couldn't dwell on any of the performers. So they all play stereotypes, really.
Right. Right. Well, it's incredible that they would, I mean, in a way to have made the film so long was pretty bold, especially for an action disaster film. I mean, it's like epic in scope, and it feels so real. I mean, and I know you interviewed that the firefighter towards the end, and he said how accurate the film was about the hazards involved in these buildings and what firefighters go through. And you write, of course, about Irwin Allen, the producer of the film, who seems like quite a character, who also
Oh boy.
produced
Yeah.
the Poseidon Adventure, which another 70s disaster film that I really love. You talked about the fact that he's not someone who's been written extensively about. Now, I imagine, is that because people don't take his kind of movies or kind of seriously, the kind of lowbrow? Do you think that's unfair?
Irwin Allen was a very strange person. I only met him in the lobby of the theater, and then because I was a mere mortal, he wouldn't really talk to me. Nor should he. I was his junior publicist, you know. But The Towering Inferno was really not only the greatest disaster film ever made, but it was Irwin Allen's greatest achievement of the hundreds of television shows he was involved in and the dozens of movies. But no one will ever know Irwin Allen. And that is because, and I
Mm,
don't know why, he blocked every single piece of personal information about himself. And
wow.
this goes back to the 1950s when he was making a documentary of the sea around us and trying to get pictures made. Nowhere in the files can anybody find anything about Irwin Allen other than his birth name was Irwin Grinovit, and he had a brother, I think, and he had parents. The biographies that you find in the files about him from the 1950s on are all essentially rewritten through the 1980s. He seems to have had a personal life. I don't know about his military service. I checked it, couldn't find any record of it. There's a fellow named Jeff Bond who has written a number of wonderful books about the various series that Irwin made. And
Oh,
he was
okay.
going through the Irwin Allen archives. I made arrangements to go through the Irwin Allen archives too until they were put up on auction. But there was nothing in them about Irwin Allen. He simply pruned everything that anybody could ever find out about him. There's no scandal in the papers. There's no, he married late in life to Sheila Matthews, who was one of the actresses in one of his films. Um, he seems to be very normal in every way, except he was a workaholic. I mean, a real workaholic, overseeing every aspect of his films and television shows, rewriting scripts. He was an absolute demon when it came to wanting perfection, and probably one of the greatest producers because of that Hollywood has ever known.
The other thing that you mentioned was that some possibilities with why he blocked so much of his past was perhaps because he was in an immigrant child, or his parents were immigrants, I believe, and they grew up, struggled, lived in, and so maybe, that's, as you said in the book, very common for people to sort of try to, fit in America and do away with their their background or their heritage. I can't help but wonder if that does have something to do with it. We can only speculate, I assume.
Yeah, I'm not very good at psychoanalyzing people, especially people who are dead. But it seems to me that Irwin Allen's penchant for keeping his life secret was simply that either he was ashamed of it or there was something there so horrible he didn't want anybody to know
Mm,
about. I can't imagine that. But I
right,
can imagine that he embraced the American dream so tightly that he didn't want to be seen as in any way elusive of it.
right. And you also wrote a book on Stirling Siliphant, who of course was a screenwriter, and you of course knew him. There's some of his interviews are in the book that you did with him on this film. Why did you want to write a book on him?
It's very rare to write biographies of writers, maybe a few memoirs, but for some reason, writers are the invisible people in Hollywood. And
Mm,
I was so moved by Stirling, his life, and the privilege of interviewing him for a book called Backstory, which is put out by the University of California Press, that I extended that. And there was also a kind of a compulsion. Another reason I wanted to write a biography of Stirling Siliphant was that quite literally, his widow, Tiana, told me this on his deathbed. He asked that I write a story about the two of them and their love. It was an undying love. She was one of his later wives, and it was astonishing the amount of loyalty that she had to Sterling. And so the archives were opened up. In fact, I kind of curated his archives and was able to find all sorts of wonderful things in them, in which I was able to include them in the book. But Sterling was a creative dynamo, the same way that Irwin was, and I'm surprised they even got along. I mean, the man wrote something like 140 of the 165 scripts for Route 66. At the same
Wow.
time, he was writing Naked City. At the same time, he was freelancing for Hitchcock. The man could type mostly on a Selectric, faster and more completely than anybody I knew. And he didn't have to revise that much. Or if you did have to revise a script, he simply set a time and did it. I mean, I looked through his address in appointment books. From 9 to 10, he'll work on this script. From 11 to 12, he'll work on this script.
Oh, wow.
Towards 6 p.m. when he could have a martini. He was absolutely the most disciplined writer I've ever known,
Great
and a
juggler.
hell of a storyteller, and just a great guy to hang around with. We managed to spend a certain amount of time together. Not only I handled him for publicity for the Towering Inferno in '74, but then later in life when he sneaked into Los Angeles and met only a few people, a few of his handful of friends, and I was fortunate enough to be one of them.
I,
And that was another very personal reason to write a book.
I forgot that he did In the Heat of the Night, which is a film I love. I just recently reviewed it after Norma Jewison passed. It's I mean radically different, Towering Inferno In the Heat of the So I mean, as you said, and all the things he juggled, wow, that's that's
Yeah.
incredible. I'll have to read that biography. I didn't again John Gillerman, who directed the film. I didn't realize that was the guy who did the remake of King Kong from the one from the 70s.
Mhm.
Interesting, because what he was saying was that a lot of the things he did were not necessarily his tastes, but it just happened that these were the things he got offered, and he did well. And I'm glad you wrote that, because I think so often people forget that a lot of people who work in film or any creative profession don't always have choice, can't always choose. Not everybody's Scorsese or has that or is that fortunate. And I thought that was a great thing to mention, because people got bills to pay, and they got to take what comes. But I mean, he certainly made a number of really good films. I mean, what is your impression of his filmography overall? Are you a fan of his work?
But Gillerman is a very good workmanlike director who managed to handle a number of genres. He was a very good organizer. I mean, I remember his early film, The Blue Max, which is terrific with George Papard. He also made a number of other movies, one of which was, oh God, Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, which my friend Yoram Ben-Ami produced. And Yoram wrote a wonderful book about the making of Sheena, which
Ah,
involved John Gillerman and Tanya Roberts, poor thing, and
yeah.
a lot of animals. And Gillerman was just an absolute diplomat in how he handled all the animals, some of whom had four legs, some of whom had two legs. So he had a great strength in organizing. So his filmography is varied, but he's never been really given the due
Mm,
that he deserved, because some of these were large action films and they got away from him. And I don't think
right.
he deserved that. I think when you're working with Gino De Laurentiis on King Kong, you've got two gorillas to deal with.
Oh God. Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure. Well, again, the book is called More Fire, The Building of the Towering Inferno, a 50th anniversary explosion. For people who want to get the book, where's the best place for them to go?
The usual booksellers online, you have Amazon, you have Barnes and Noble, and you can go directly to the publisher, Bear Manor Media. But it's probably easier just to click Amazon and have it in front of you as you celebrate the 50th anniversary, which will be this December. And it is the greatest disaster movie ever made. And I hope that people saw it originally and that they've caught it since then. It was really a piece of pride of mine to be able to write this book and canonize, if you will, a movie that has so many hearts in its favor. Thank
And
you,
if they
Robert.
if they get it at Bear Manor, you get some more cash. So maybe they should go there.
For a 50-year-old film, I don't think it matters. Just buy the book and see the movie.
Well, and for anyone in Toronto, they are showing it at the Fox Theater on May 26th at 7 p.m. Sunday Classics, 50th anniversary of the Towering Inferno. I'll leave the link in the description box on their website. If you're in Toronto, this is a film I think I'm going to go to see on the big screen. certainly. And I just will plug some of your other books that I've interviewed Nat about. First, we got Say Hello to My Little Friend, A Century of Scarface. And there's an audiobook on this now, right?
It is being released even as we record this.
Wow. Well, that's great. Well, then there's another option for people. And then, of course, we have The Exorcist Legacy, 50 Years of Fear. And then I love this one, Breaking the Code, Otto Preminger versus Hollywood Censors. And then, like, this is my Nat Segaloff library. Arthur Penn, American director, which I mean, I love all the books. So I will leave all the links to all these interviews that I've done with Nat in the description box down below. And I would say that maybe Nat should take a break, but what do you have? You got something else out soon, I believe.
Yeah, the end of this month. Sorry, Robert. I have
no
it's
apologies.
the only book for this year. End of this month, I have something called The Naughty Bits, which is coming out from a brand new publisher called Sticking Place Books. It'll be available from Amazon. And that is, I went through thousands of letters between the Motion Picture Production Code, which were Hollywood censors, and the various producers for 50 or so great films over the years, from Casablanca to Gone with the Wind to The Adventures of Robin Hood to The Sound of Music. It's a kind of an extension of my Otto Preminger book, but this one goes into the nitty-gritty of what you could and couldn't say or do on the screen. And some of it is so particular that you couldn't even put the letters on the screen. They're so specific. God. So The Naughty Bits is a lot of fun to read, and it was even more fun to write.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. And when that comes out, I'll have to get a copy and have you back on. So, Nat, thanks again. And let's do it again. I'm sure we will.
Thank you again, Robert. You're my friend.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is exclusive content that I create month in and month out. And as a subscriber, you are able to vote on polls and contribute to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on the thanks link and you can leave a donation there if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner. To your top left in just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Also click the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, you can also share the episode. All of these things are what produce traction to my YouTube channel. So I appreciate you watching and thank you again. And I will see you in the next episode.